doing here. Today's shir is sponsored by Gary and Ella Diamond. Where's Gary's here? And it's Le'ilui Nishmas, Gary's mother. Yortzeit tomorrow. It's Sarah Rivka Bas Yirmiya HaKohen, correct? Yortzeit is tomorrow, so the neshama should have an aliyah. We thank you for sponsoring it today. We thank you for keeping me caffeinated every day, every shir. So the neshama should benefit from the words of Torah that we're going to be sharing here today. It's Parshas Terumah. Parshas Terumah. You can find it on page 444 of your Art Scroll Chumash. The construction of the tabernacle takes place according to the rabbinic reading and Rashi's approach that after the sin of the golden calf, the nation loses this close relationship. It regains it with the construction of the tabernacle, and therefore the details, the information provided in this week's portion, according to the tradition, are given to the people of Israel right after Yom Kippur. And there's a description of many vessels, like the Holy Ark and the table and the menorah and the altar and eventually the kior where the hands are washed. Details are presented. I want to work backwards. I want to first start off on page 448 with the shulchan, with the table. It was a table. And you have to imagine the tabernacle that there's an inner chamber known as the Holy of Holies, where they would keep the Holy Ark. The Holy Ark would have in it the luchot, the tablets, and in addition would have the shivrei luchot, the broken tablets. It is a concept that Judaism has always retained, that there is significant even to the broken tablets. And the Talmud shares with us that if you meet a scholar, a Torah scholar, but unfortunately, due to old age, he mentally is not completely able to make the contribution he did in the past, so nevertheless you shall respect him fully, because he's considered like the shivrei luchos. Okay, this is a concept that the rabbis teach. In addition, in the Holy Ark, they placed a copy of the Torah. The Torah, when it was eventually recorded a few decades later, they kept a copy of the Torah itself in it as well. Now, what we're going to focus on is what is in the second chamber, known as the Kodesh, where they had the menorah, they had the mizbech, the altar, the golden altar, and they had as well the table, the shulchan. So on page 448, verse 23, we are told that you make this shulchan from the acacia wood, atzei shittim, and its dimensions are 2 by 1 amma. So in amma is about 20 inches. So it's basically about 40 inches by 20 inches. That is the dimension of the table. Okay? And what do you place on the table itself? Well, what you do is you place these breads. And that appears on verse 30. Venatata al hashulchan. So this is on page 450 already. That you shall place on the table the show bread. Show bread before me always. It should always be there. What does it mean to always have bread on the table? So we are told as follows. That the bread was baked on Fridays. Now, by the way, this is not traditional bread. This was bread that was considered matzah. They did not let it rise. It was a matzah, but it was a matzah the way the matzahs were made in the past. They were thick matzahs. As we discussed always before Pesach, that historically the rabbinic authorities always warn us that our matzah should not be thicker than a tefach. No one should have a matzah, I warn you, more than 3.2 inches in thickness. It is extremely problematic if you find such a matzah. This is what we are told in the Talmud. And then throughout, you read the literature. Every century it starts shrinking, and we're at crackers. That's what, in essence, occurred. And it is interesting to note that if you go through the literature, you notice that 700 years ago, it was more pita-like. There are communities, by the way, that still retain the tradition. I remember David sent me an email about a thicker matzah. The matzah that was used for the lechem hapanim was a matzah, meaning they would mix the flour with water and bake it immediately, but it was thick. It was a tefach. It was the thickness of, again, about 3.2 to 3.5 inches. That is called the lechem. Now, it was baked on a Friday. On Shabbat, they would place it on this table. There were 12 loaves. 12 loaves of these breads. Each loaf had the volume of an isaron, which is 43.2 eggs. That was the volume of each loaf. Now, by the way, this is a significant measurement because when you make challah, and you want to know, do I make a bracha for separating challah or not? The measurement, so people are familiar with measurements like 3.5 pounds or 5 pounds, 8 cups, 11 cups, depends who you ask. But the measurement, the actual measurement is a measurement that goes by volume. The volume is 43.2 eggs. That's the volume that's given. And we translate that, every egg is about 1.9 ounces. So you would do 43.2 times 1.9, right? And that would be the result. So your hafrashas challah, separating challah, has nothing to do with weight. It has to do with volume. Okay, now, that aside, every loaf out of the 12 had the volume of 43.2 eggs. So if you multiply that by 12, you have these nice size loaves on a table, stacked. 6 of them are stacked on one side, 6 are stacked. Yes?
Why is the volume according to the eggs?
Okay, so it works as follows. The volume itself is actually called, the measurement is called an isaron. An isaron. The word isaron comes from the word eser. Eser in this case means a tenth. A tenth. So the proper volume of each bread is an isaron, is a tenth. Now you're going to ask me, a tenth of what? So I'll answer that it's a tenth of an ephah. That was a measurement. Everyone knows what an ephah is, right? Okay, so you're going to ask me, well, what is an ephah? Well, I'm going to tell you that an ephah is a measurement of 3 se'ah. Okay? 3 se'ah makes an ephah. So you can ask me, of course, so what is the measurement of a se'ah? So I'm going to tell you that if you take 6 kav measurements, then you will have a se'ah. Next question.
What's a kav?
What's a kav?
Bottom line.
What?
Bottom line.
Bottom line. Okay.
So challah without eggs is...
Well, remember, it's volume. It's volume. It's a determined volume. Well, I'll get to the eggs soon. We're halfway there, by the way. So we did the ephah, we did the se'ah, we did the kav. So what is a kav, you asked me? Okay. It is 4 lugs. And again, this is a measurement that in the past people were very familiar with. And don't think this is only the Jews. These are measurements that were very common in the whole region. So a lug was a common... Now, you're going to ask me, the last question is, what is the measurement of a lug? A lug is the measurement, we are told, of 6 eggs. So now, if you multiply, right, you go from the egg to the lug,
small,
to the kav.
medium, and large are different.
Okay, so the average egg. The average egg. Now, by the way, this measurement of a lug is significant because when we are told that you're supposed to, your kiddush cup should be a measurement of, we call it a revi'it. That's what everybody, does it have a revi'is? You know, does it have a revi'it? That's what's asked from your days. So now, what does a revi'it mean literally? A quarter. A quarter of what? A quarter of a lug. So now that you know that a lug is 6 eggs, and your kiddush cup has to have a quarter of a lug, so how many eggs is that? 1.5. And therefore your kiddush cup, you want to know the size of a kiddush cup? I'll tell you. An egg, the volume of an egg is 1.9. You should be machmir, if you could, 2 ounces. So it's 2 times 1.5, which is 3 ounces. That's why your kiddush cup is 3 ounces. You want to go more, you're more than welcome. But 3 ounces is the measurement. All this comes together. So now, the reason I mentioned the 43.2 eggs is because the ephah, the ephah, that big measurement, if you did the math, if you went ahead and you multiplied our eggs, right, and you did the 4 times 6 times 3 times 6, you came out, of course, to 432. So the ephah has 432 eggs. The isaron, which we are told is the measurement of each loaf, is a tenth of 432, and therefore that's how I got to 43.2. Okay, that's
Why is there such a difference between mafresh challah? Some say 12 cups, some say 10 cups, some say 15 cups.
Okay, so over the past 200 years, there's been, I'm going to be careful with what word I use, but there's been this approach and concern that perhaps today's eggs are not as big as they were in the past, which is not, I don't feel it is the case. But due to that concern, if you believe indeed that the eggs once upon a time ago, right, were bigger, so then suddenly you have to multiply all your measurements. That's where it comes about that you hire. Why are there some people that say that for a Kiddush cup you have to have 5 or 6 ounces? Where do they get that from? They got it from this concern that today's eggs are perhaps smaller than they were in the past. Where, wie euch gefällt, how do you say in Yiddish? How did such a thing fall into someone's head? Well, eingefallt, you see? Eingefallt, that's the word. Wie does eingefallt? I messed up that too. Eingefallt. Wie does eingefallt, right? Forget it. It's one thing I should brush up on the Yiddish. Anyway. How did someone come up with eggs were once upon a time bigger? So it works as follows. When the rabbis talk about a mikvah, the measurement of a mikvah, so in rabbinic literature we find 2 measurements presented. One measurement is that a mikvah has to have enough water that would fill a pit that is amma al amma berum gimel amot, meaning 3 square amma. Amma is always the measurement from the top of your finger until your elbow. Like your size, not mine. Like in other words, a mensch of a normal size. That would be an amma, right? That's the amma. So we are told that the mikvah's measurement is amma al amma, meaning 3 square amma. That's one measurement presented in the Talmud.
3 cubic.
3 cubic amot, correct. And then we are told as well that a mikvah is 40 se'ah. Now, if you remember the se'ah mentioned earlier, and you do the math, it comes out that there's something like 5,700 and something eggs in the 40 se'ah. Now, someone did not crack 5,700 eggs, but rather he did the math, and they give credit, he's not the first, but the credit for this equation of comparing the 2 sources, where one, the measurement is presented based on the size of the human being, and the other one is based on eggs. So there was a great rabbi in Prague, Rabbi Ezekiel Landau, known as the Nodab Yehuda, one of the great poskim of the 18th century, and he sensed that there's a major discrepancy, that if you build a mikvah based on the size of the amot, and then you match it to the measurement of eggs, the eggs will only fill a touch more than a half, indicating either that perhaps people were smaller in the past, or perhaps eggs were bigger. And this was his serious concern, and therefore he stated that perhaps a way to deal with this contradiction is by stating that the eggs in the past in Talmudic times were bigger. That's what he stated. And from that it snowballed into all kind of interesting things, because, for example, we are told, according to some, that the size of an olive is a half an egg in volume, right? Which is really less, but nevertheless. So if you say that the eggs were larger in the past, perhaps the olives were larger, and therefore when you're supposed to eat your kizayit on the Seder night, the kizayit suddenly is not what you would rationally think the size of an olive, but perhaps the size of an olive. And that it snowballed. That's really the source for this whole dilemma debate. It's very interesting that this Nodab Yehuda had a disciple, Rabbi Lezer Fleckels, who was a very rational individual, very bright. He took over his master's position in Prague, so obviously he was the greatest of his rabbinic students. And he turned to his master and he said, "Master, you know why there's a contradiction? Because you measured. So Rabbi Lando said to him, what do you mean? He says, well, Rabbi Lando, you're gigantic. You're taller than all the tall people. That's what he was known as, a very tall person. I would estimate he was probably like 6'6", Rabbi Cheskel Landau. Someone once told me, and I met a few Landaus that are tall, but then I mentioned it here, and I was told, no, I know a Landau and he's short. So I don't say that anymore. But Rabbi Landau was indeed a very tall person. So when he measured, the measurement was based on his own Amma. It became a challenge. If a normal person would measure, there would be no contradictions. That's why there's this whole debate. Come Pesach, we discuss this. It's a fascinating discussion and debate, but that's...
What's the bottom line with challah?
Okay, with challah itself...
I want the tachlis.
So you have to ask my wife. What's the bottom line of challah? What do we say? 3.5... I think I say 3.5 pounds for a bracha? I don't remember.
For a bracha?
For a bracha, how much? How much do you say for bracha?
5 pounds.
5 pounds, that's the bottom line. Right?
Well, if you live in the United States, where the bags
Whatever my wife
have
says.
5 pounds, it's dubbed in the
No,
whole
but I make this based on 4 cups per...
Whatever Miriam says. 5 pounds, that's the bottom line. Okay, and again, it's different school. Now, maybe we should get back to the party. Really? Yeah. Can you look please at the picture on page 449? 2 pictures on page 449. You see the picture? What do you see on the bottom picture? A table.
Yeah.
And there are these pillars to support the bread with these tubes. Why do you have those tubes?
To carry it?
To support the bread. The bread, of course, if you're going to place 6 heavy stacks of bread, one on top of the other, the bottom one is going to turn into a modern-day matzah, obviously. It's going to be crushed. So therefore, you have these pillars and these tubes to support the loaves.
Racks.
Fine? So far, so good?
You mean the racks?
Racks. Call them racks. What is about the upper picture? What is the upper picture? The showbread itself. The showbread itself. Do you see the shape of this showbread? And this is actually a very good drawing or 3D because it has this unique shape where the corners are pulled in. A very unique shape. I have not seen such challah baked. I believe that it's going to be quite a challenge to even bake a challah because it would expand. But this is what tradition taught. Okay? Why the uniqueness of this shape? That's question number 1 of the day. Why the uniqueness of the shape as you see on the picture on page 449? Question number 2. Why is this called lechem? Now lechem, we're all comfortable with. It is a bread. Even matzah is a bread. And some note that if you look at the word lechem, in the context here, there are 2 words you could read into it. Lach. Lach means moist, lechut, and cham. Lechem is lach and cham, moist and hot. And the rabbis had a tradition that even though the breads were placed on the table on a Shabbat, they would only be consumed and eaten by the Kohanim a week later. They would remain on that table for a week. But at times that the nation of Israel merited, there was a miracle that occurred, and the bread remained moist and
Soft.
hot. And soft too. Well, lach and cham. So we're very comfortable with the fact that the bread was called lechem. Now, why is it called lechem hapanim? Panim. Why is it called lechem hapanim? So you're going to say, well, the shape is such that it's looking at something, but why does that become the name of the bread? It should be lechem ha-miuchad, lechem shel shulchan. The panim must carry, there must be more of a reason for the fact that it is identified as lechem hapanim. That's the question I want to deal with today in our class. To understand it, we're going to go ahead and move backwards and look at the Holy Ark. And again, a picture will help us here on page 447. The Holy Ark had on top of it cherubim. Cherubim were an image of an angel. This is how we picture an angel with the wings. And this has been a very old tradition of this is how you picture an angel. Maimonides in the guide of the Perplexed writes that angels play a significant role in our tradition because the concept of an angel is communication. How does God communicate with the world? He causes things to occur. He causes a storm, from a snowstorm to a hurricane. Those two are angels of God because God wants that hurricane to occur. So this image of an angel serves the following purpose. We are believers that God communicates with the world. He communicates through the Torah. The Torah is in the ark. On top of that receiver, on top of that holy ark, there is an angel indicating, symbolizing the idea that there is a connection between the physical and spiritual realm. We are believers God communicated with man. God communicated with humanity. Angels are placed on top of this device of communication to emphasize this idea that there is a connection. Why two, Maimonides asks? Why two? Because he notes that if there would be only one angel to convey the message, there would be a danger of people worshipping that one angel. Because one, like one God, so therefore two are placed. This is what Maimonides tells us. What I want to focus on is the fact that they are facing one another. And this appears in the text itself, that there were keruvim. There were these kerubim. Please, 448. And we are told that these keruvim in verse 20, they were number one, porsei knafaim. They spread their wings upward. And then the wings themselves, they shelter with their wings. Key words that I want to focus on, upneihem, and their faces are ish el achiv, towards one another. They are facing, these cherubim are facing one another. Come the rabbis in the Talmud and they tell us that this is very symbolic, because when there's a face-to-face relationship, there's a connection. There's love, right? A couple cannot really connect if one or two are on their smartphone, right? It's not a healthy form of communication. Face-to-face is communication. So the Talmud tells us that one of these cherubim symbolizes the Almighty. One of them symbolizes the people of Israel. We have a relationship with the God of Israel. It's a face-to-face relationship. And that's why the text spells out, Upnehem ish el achiv. Beautiful. Nice? We have a message here, a very nice message that God connects to the people of Israel. Now, the problem is that if you look in Tanakh that describes the structure of the Temple of Solomon, of Shlomo HaMelech, the Bet HaMikdash, he added some cherubim, he added angels, meaning besides the ones that were on top of the Holy Ark, he placed some other angels there, we are told. And the text makes it very clear that you should know that these cherubim were pnehem, listen carefully, pnehem, you would expect the words to be ish el achiv, because they were always in a set of two. Upnehem, this is a verse in Divrei Hayamim, el habayit, meaning they're facing one another, but they're not looking at one another. One of them is like, the distracted child in class. It's perhaps facing the teacher, but its eyes are towards something else. This is very odd. Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, placing these cherubim, trying to structure it with the format of the tabernacle, but he decides that he's going to do it a little bit differently. That they're not going to be face-to-face, but rather, upnehem el habayit, towards the walls. Why? Wonders the Talmud. So, comes the Talmud and gives us an explanation, but I'll clarify it based on what Reb Chaim Volozhin tells us. Reb Chaim Volozhin. Before I share with you the insight given by Reb Chaim Volozhin, and again, what we're trying to do is clarify the cherubim. That's what we're trying to do. Clarify this shift that occurs, that King Solomon, Shlomo HaMelech, makes this crucial decision to make an adjustment from the structure given by the tabernacle.
Who saw the ones that were inside? Only the Kohanim, or did the Ravam see them, or what?
So we are told that every holiday they would roll up the curtain for people to see them, to see the relationship. This was something that is mentioned indeed. In the Bet HaMikdash. In the Bet HaMikdash.
The first one.
It wasn't there afterwards. In the first Bet HaMikdash.
Yeah.
Correct. We'll get to that soon. You know, Reb Chaim Volozhin establishes the yeshiva in the city of Volozhin in 1802, 1803. It's in existence for 90 years, and it is known as the father of the modern-day yeshiva. That's not to say that yeshivot did not exist in the past, but historically, yeshivot were as follows. Every town had a rabbi. The rabbi was a scholar. The rabbi, part of his contract was that the community would support 6, 8, perhaps 10 young students who were recognized as very brilliant and capable, and ones who had it within them to make a contribution to the congregation as educators on their own. And that was the yeshiva, the local yeshiva. The concept of a yeshiva, that you have students coming from a distance, right, existed in the past, but not on the scale of Volozhin. Okay? And there was a major shift as a result of the product coming out of yeshivot, especially as it translated into the 20th century, when in the past, a rabbinic scholar meant someone who's going to go ahead and deal and interact with the congregation, with the community, deal with the difficulties that exist, and try to find solutions that people could survive and get what they need. It became more of an institution of theory. Now, what do I mean by that? For example, you talk about the 16th century, and one of my favorite shuvot that I always quote is the Ramah. The Ramah She'islis, many of you saw his shul from the travelers here. Ramah She'islis in the 16th century was told that there's a crisis in town. They were importing olive oil from Italy. Someone was spreading a rumor that the olive oil barrels were smeared on the inside with pig fat. If your olive oil has a little bit of a flavor of pig fat, it's a little bit of a problem. And therefore, there were those who were telling others to avoid olive oil. Communities need olive oil because there were no other oils at the time. So the Ramah gives a tshuva where he analyzes the reality, and he says it's 100% permissible. He deals with what is. In other words, he's not trying to seek out a standard for the few, but he's rather dealing with what the masses need to do for survival. When, on the other hand, you look through some of the literature of the 20th century, you have individuals that there's a little bit of a different focus. They try to find, stringencies. It has its place, by the way. But that's no longer for the masses. That's perhaps for individuals. So this is really a topic we could address of the shift, the significant shift that occurs when the yeshiva used to be sitting by a teacher who is interacting with a town, or sitting with a teacher who is focusing only on a very small group. This is a shift that occurs. Now, by the way, if you read about what's occurring in the state of Israel with the Haredi community, right? The Haredi community have been making a tremendous contribution for many decades in Limud HaTorah, the study of Torah. We as a nation cannot survive, and did not survive, if not for the people studying Torah. We know that very well. We cannot exist without it. Studying Torah is an ideal. It's the greatest mitzvah. It is something we are all required to do, and there's a tremendous amount of knowledge that exists because of so many people sitting and learning Torah day and night. But now comes the question, because we happen to live in a physical world, and believe it or not, you need to eat, and you need to have a home, and you need to feed your children, and there's something called clothes. So now we have a little bit of a problem. You're supposed to ideally study Torah day and night, but what about surviving? Now this is a complex question. And it is something that has been dealt with already in the Talmud many, many centuries ago by two great scholars in the beginning of the 2nd century. And they had a debate. One of the rabbis was by the name of Rabbi Yishmael, and the other rabbi was Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Yishmael tells us that you should know what the Almighty wants from us to do is to work in the fields, because look in the text of the Torah. The text in the Torah tells us that if you fulfill the mitzvahs of Hashem, God will bless your field. There'll be produce, right? There'll be goods, there'll be bounty. So obviously what God is saying is you work in the fields, you'll be successful there. The ideal Jew obviously studies Torah, but at the same time, recognizing the fact that we live in a physical world, does what is physically required. That's the school of Rabbi Yishmael. Comes Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai says, nope, That is not an ideal. It's perhaps something that unfortunately occurs, but the ideal is for the Jew to only be spiritual, only study Torah. Who's going to work? We asked Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai, he'll say, let the others do it. That's the two philosophies that are presented. Comes the Talmud, and the Talmud tells us, you should know, many people who attempted the Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai philosophy of only learning Torah failed. Many people failed. On the other hand, those who followed Rabbi Ishmael succeeded. Explain the commentators that for the masses, there is no question, the masses, when you educate your child, you have a mitzvah of training the child to live in a world, a physical world, you're going to have to earn a living. That's what you have to do as a good Jew, right? Not because we don't value the Torah. It is actually because we value the Torah. We want to be sure that it is a person that could survive, find a job that's decent, that could earn enough to survive, and then study Torah. For the masses, there's no question. The masses should follow Rabbi Ishmael. This is what the Talmud tells us. And this is what their halakha authorities tell us. This has been the normal approach for hundreds and hundreds of years. There were always individuals who were recognized as very capable, very spiritual, and they were told, you don't do anything. You be supported by the community, not because they're doing him a favor, but because that individual can make such a contribution in the study of Torah and the teaching of Torah, that God forbid that such a person should be busy with the marketplace. This is like the healthy arrangement that the Talmud gives us and was followed for many, many generations. We all know that in the state of Israel, what was recommended for the few turned into a movement of many. We know that. We also know how it originated. It originated because if you would move to Israel in the 19th century, you would not be able to earn a living there, period. Very, very few individuals had any training in the little bit of farming that they had, which was quite limited in Eretz Israel. So what are you supposed to do in Israel? So people would move to Eretz Israel, and they would be supported by their local communities. They would send charities. The Hungarische would send for the Hungarische, right? And the Polish to the Polish. That's what was occurring. Now they had, instead of every single community sending funds to members of their community, they had like this fund that they called a fund that includes many communities. Kolel, it includes many communities. And that's where the term Kolel came into existence. So therefore, if I am in Europe in 1885 and I decide I'm making my way to Eretz Israel, I'm going to go ahead and live off the Chalukah, and I will join one of the Kolels. This is the format that existed then for a couple hundred people. But as time develops, Kenai Nahara, the couple hundred, it grows. And there's a challenge that exists. And there's a major shift that up until 15 years ago, there was an expectation in those communities that you continue with that philosophy. Now, the past 10 years, I would say, there's a major shift occurring in Israel, where the rabbinic personality known as the Gadol Hador, his name is Rabbi Aaron Leib Steinman, a great rabbi. His Kenai Nahara, I think 101 or 102. And he has a little bit of a different approach. He actually is one who recognizes that times have changed. And there's a major shift. Perhaps at some other point we could talk about the shifts that are occurring over the past decade in Israel, where there's an understanding of the new realities. Rabbi Ishmael and Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai. You have him. Comes Reb Chaim Volozhin and he says the following. In the wilderness, the relationship between the people of Israel and the God of Israel was such that it was face to face. They were always in a spiritual state. In the wilderness, they were not working the field. In the wilderness, they did not have to worry about food. They had the manna. So therefore, the state of relationship and the ideal form, the relationship of the people of Israel had the God of Israel, was a panim el panim, face to face. And therefore, the krubim were set in the wilderness. The commandment when they made the Holy Ark was that the kruvim should be panim el panim, because that was the relationship they had at that time. On the other hand, when the temple is built by Shlomo HaMelech, when there's a Bet HaMikdash, in a Bet HaMikdash is built at a time that people have fields. People work in the fields, right? People work the land. Yes, there's a close relationship to God, but it's the same God who wants you to worship Him, wants you to work the field, and take care of the needs of the family. You are no longer every moment focusing on God, but even at that time when you are involved in the field, you are still fulfilling the will of God. When you are in the marketplace, if you are an honest person in the workplace, that itself is also the will of God. But it is not that face-to-face. So therefore, notes Reb Chaim Volozhin, that in the temple, when Shlomo HaMelech establishes or places these cherubim, they're not pnehem ish el achiv, but rather pnehem labait. A little bit of tilting away to indicate, to symbolize this idea that this is no longer a time that you are for the masses. This is no longer a time for you to expect to be always spiritual, always in prayer, always in Torah, because there's a land to work, and this is the will of God. This is how he explains the discrepancy, or the fact that Shlomo HaMelech makes this crucial decision to make that shift. Great insight. So it comes out, where do we? Now, in other words, you go to work, right? Or you went to work if you're retired, right? You went to work. You work in the workplace, but you still find time to study Torah and to daven, and Shabbos is important for you. Where do you find, in other words, now that you are supposed to put the bread on the table, how do you find that face-to-face relationship with God? You're no longer going to find it with the cherubim, but suddenly you're supposed to find and supposed to understand that even the bread you get, it's a gift from God. The fact is that even the success in the workplace, it's a gift from Almighty God, from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. How do you, so it comes out that the panim el panim, that in the wilderness was, you were able to get from the Holy Ark. Now when you are in the workplace, where do you find the panim el panim? In your bread. In your bread. Your bread itself. When a person goes to work and understands that this is a gift from God that I have talents, it's a gift from God that I have the education. I look where I came from. You know, I was born, I came to this country at age, how old are you? At age 10 or 9, right? And how much English did you know in 1956, 57?
About the same amount I know.
No. So, you know, the little bit, or you look at your parents, look at what people came with this country, and you look at other immigrants and what they were, and you look at Baruch Hashem, you're able to feed a family. You see God, panim el panim, you have a face-to-face relationship with God on your bread. Your bread indicates that it is not random. We are not believers that we have our parnas because we're brilliant, because we're smart, but it's a gift from the Almighty. So the new place to be panim el panim is, of course, with the lechem. And therefore it is called the lechem hapanim. And if you look carefully on page 449 at the image of the unique shape of that bread, you look at the unique shape of that bread, does it not remind you of those angels looking at one another? 100% it does. So that is basically what we have to walk away with. The bread is a sign of the close relationship that the people of Israel have with the God of Israel. And what's interesting, as Aaron mentioned, there are two statements in the Talmud where the rabbis share with us that when the people of Israel would make their way to Jerusalem during the holidays, to Yerushalayim for the Chagim, they would show them items from the temple that would indicate and teach to the people of Israel the unique close relationship that the God of Israel has with the people of Israel. So listen to one statement. The Talmud shares with us, B'sha'a shehayu Yisrael olim laregel. When the people of Israel would make their way for the pilgrimage to Jerusalem, Megalalin lahem et haparochet, they would go ahead and roll up the partition between the Holy of Holies and the rest of the temple. And they would show them the kerubim, and they would show them the kerubim on the Holy Ark to teach them, Re'u chibatchem lifnei hamakom, see how close you have a relationship with the God of Israel. Okay? Next rabbinic statement. Now, we don't find other vessels being carried or showed to the rest of the people. We find it, number one, regarding the Holy Ark. Number two, The Talmud shares with us that at the time you would have the olei regalim. They would show the showbread. They would walk around. They would actually carry the bread, the table with bread. I wonder if this is imitated by other cultures. They would carry the table of bread. And what they would want to show the people of Israel is that there was a miracle with the bread. What was the miracle? The fact that it remained fresh. In the words of the rabbis, silu koke sidura, it would remain on the table for a week, but the freshness, the lach, and the cham would remain. Why specifically do they choose these two items to parade in front of the nation? Why do these two items become the symbol, the relationship the people of Israel has with the God of Israel? Because the lechem took over the role of the kerubim. The kerubim are when we are on that right ideal state of the wilderness, when you could be only involved in spirituality. But today, the God of Israel wants people to go to the marketplace. A parent is supposed to train the child. It's a mitzvah to figure out how you can earn a living, right? Figure out the talents of the child. Hopefully they have some. And you go ahead and you train them. You direct them. You guide them. That's a mitzvah. And the goal is you tell the child it is important to earn a living, because when you earn a living, you can find at the same time for limud Torah, which is so important. But when you are in the marketplace, remember, recognize that it's a gift from God. Recognize that you are still panim el panim when you have the bread on the table. And to emphasize that idea, the lechem hapanim are going to be in the format of the kruvim, which are indeed the panim el panim. That's what we have today, and I thank you for listening, and I thank you for coming. Thank you for sponsorship, and a good day to everyone.